Get those shaky hands off my counter, old man! The cashier's voice sliced through the hum of the grocery store, sharp and venomous, dripping with disdain. The words landed like a slap, silencing the chatter of nearby shoppers. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sterile glow over the small-town market where the air smelled of fresh bread and overripe fruit. Behind the register, a young woman, barely out of her teens with a name tag reading Kayla, glared at the elderly man standing before her. Her lips curled into a sneer as she shoved a crumpled receipt back toward him. James Jim Whitaker, 78 years old, stood frozen, his weathered hands trembling slightly as they clutched a small stack of groceries. A loaf of bread, a can of soup, and a single apple. He'd been a Marine in Vietnam, a man who'd once carried wounded comrades through jungles under fire, but now his hands betrayed him, shaking from age and the ghosts of old injuries. The store was quiet now, save for the faint squeak of a shopping cart in the distance and the low hum of a refrigerator. Shoppers nearby averted their eyes, their discomfort palpable, as Kayla's words hung in the air like a bad smell. Jim's heart thudded, not from fear but from a deep, aching disbelief. He'd come to this store every week for years, always with a kind word, always tipping the baggers despite his fixed income. Today he'd even paused to help a young mother untangle her toddler's shoelaces in the aisle, his gentle smile calming the fussy child. That small act of kindness had warmed his chest, a rare moment where he felt useful again. But now as Kayla's eyes bored into him, that warmth turned to ash. His fingers, still clutching his veteran's discount card, shook harder, not from his condition, but from the sting of her words. "You're holding up the line!" Kayla snapped, gesturing to the three people behind Jim who shifted awkwardly, their baskets clinking with cans and produce. "Just pay and go. I don't have time for this." Her voice was louder now, drawing more eyes. A man in a flannel shirt coughed, looking away. A woman with a cart full of diapers whispered to her husband. Jim's face burned, his pride warring with the urge to shrink away. He'd faced worse, enemy fire, sleepless nights in the mud. But this was different. This was his town, his store, his home, and yet he felt like an intruder. "I'm just trying to use my discount," Jim said, his voice low but steady, the kind of calm forged in chaos. He slid the card toward her, the faded photo of a younger, square-jawed version of himself staring back. The card was worn, edges frayed from years in his wallet, next to a faded photo of his late wife, Ellen, and his dog tags from '68. Kayla barely glanced at it before scoffing. "This thing? Looks fake. You probably printed it off the internet." She tossed it back and it skidded across the counter, nearly falling to the floor. The words hit Jim like a punch to the gut. Fake? He'd earned that card with blood and sweat, with nights spent staring at the stars, wondering if he'd see the next dawn. His chest tightened, memories flooding back. Ellen's letters, the smell of gunpowder, the weight of a fallen friend in his arms. He wanted to speak, to tell her about the scars under his flannel shirt, the ones no one saw, but his throat felt like sandpaper. Instead, he straightened, his trembling hands balling into fists, and met her gaze. "It's real," he said, each word deliberate. "I served." Kayla rolled her eyes, leaning back with a smirk. "Sure, Grandpa. Served coffee, maybe?" A snicker came from somewhere in the line, and Jim's stomach twisted. The store felt smaller now, the air heavier, the fluorescent lights harsher. He noticed the manager, a stocky man in a cheap tie, watching from the customer service desk but making no move to intervene. The silence from the other shoppers was deafening, their avoidance a betrayal of its own. Jim's mind raced. Should he walk away, let it go? Or should he stand his ground, demand the respect he'd earned decades ago? Then a small voice broke the tension. "Mister, are you okay?" It was the toddler from earlier, tugging at her mother's sleeve, her wide eyes fixed on Jim. The mother, flustered, pulled her back, but the girl's question hung in the air, a tiny spark of humanity in the cold store. Jim forced a smile, nodding at the child, but inside his resolve hardened. He wasn't just fighting for a discount. This was about dignity, about the years he'd given, about the man he still was. Outside, the parking lot buzzed with activity. Cars pulling in, a delivery truck unloading, the faint wail of a siren growing closer. Something was shifting, a ripple in the air that Jim couldn't yet place. He didn't know it, but the next few minutes would turn this moment upside down. We've only just begun this story, but trust me, it's about to get even more intense. Stick around to see how Jim faces an even greater injustice, and what happens when the world starts to notice. The grocery store's air felt thick, charged with the weight of unspoken judgments. Jim Whitaker stood at the register, his trembling hands still clutching his veteran's discount card, the faded photo of a younger him staring up defiantly. The cashier, Kayla, leaned back, her smirk unwavering, as if daring him to push back. The fluorescent lights buzzed like a swarm of angry bees, and the faint scent of spilled coffee from a nearby aisle mingled with the tension. Shoppers behind Jim shifted restlessly, their impatience a low murmur, but no one spoke up. The manager, still hovering at the customer service desk, adjusted his tie and looked away, his silence louder than any words. Jim's chest burned, not just from Kayla's mockery, but from the betrayal of this place. His town's market, where he'd shopped for decades, where he'd once carried bags for elderly neighbors, where he'd swapped stories with the old owner about Nam. Now it felt like enemy territory. His dog tags, tucked under his flannel, pressed against his skin, a cold reminder of who he was. He took a slow breath, steadying himself, and slid the card back toward Kayla. "Check it again," he said, his voice low but firm, like a man who'd faced worse than a snide teenager. "It's real," Kayla snorted, snatching the card with manicured nails. "Whatever, old man. You're wasting my time." She scanned it half-heartedly, her eyes flicking to the screen. Then, with a theatrical sigh, she tossed it back. "System says it's expired. Tough luck." The lie was blatant. Jim had renewed it last month at the VA, a grueling trip that cost him a day's energy. But her tone left no room for argument. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, a mix of annoyance and pity. A man in a baseball cap muttered, "Just pay already," while a woman with an overflowing cart sighed heavily. Jim's jaw tightened. Expired? He knew the truth, but proving it here under Kayla's smug gaze felt like climbing a mountain with no gear. His hands shook harder, the tremor betraying his calm exterior, and he cursed his body for failing him now. Memories flickered, carrying a wounded buddy through a monsoon, his hands steady then, even as bullets whizzed past. He'd survived that, but this was a different kind of war. "It's not expired," he said louder now, his voice cutting through the store's hum. "Run it again." Kayla's eyes narrowed, her smirk fading into something colder. "Don't tell me how to do my job," she snapped, slamming the register drawer shut. "You're holding up everyone. Pay full price or get out." The words landed like a grenade, and the crowd's restlessness exploded into open complaints. "Come on, man!" someone shouted. "We got places to be!" Jim turned, scanning the faces. Some avoided his gaze, others glared, their impatience a wall closing in. The toddler from earlier, still clinging to her mother, stared at him with wide, confused eyes, her tiny hand clutching a candy bar. The manager finally stirred, waddling over with a forced smile. "Sir, let's not make a scene," he said, his voice oily, his name tag reading Brad. "If there's an issue with your card, you can take it up with the VA. Just pay, and we'll sort it later." His tone was patronizing, like he was humoring a child, and Jim's blood boiled. He wasn't some doddering fool. He was a man who'd bled for this country, who'd buried friends, who'd built a life on honor. "I'm not leaving," Jim said, planting his feet. "Not till you honor that card." Brad's smile vanished. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," he said, lowering his voice, but the threat was clear. He gestured to a security guard near the exit, a burly man with a walkie-talkie who started ambling over. The crowd buzzed, phones emerging from pockets, their cameras glinting like vultures circling. Jim's heart pounded, but not from fear. Anger, raw and righteous, surged through him. He'd faced down enemies before. He wouldn't back down now. Then a new voice cut through the chaos. "What's going on here?" It was sharp, authoritative, coming from a woman in a crisp blazer pushing through the crowd. Her presence shifted the air, her eyes scanning the scene. Kayla's sneer, Brad's fake smile, the guard's looming figure, and Jim, standing tall despite his trembling hands. She was in her 50s, with a no-nonsense air and a badge pinned to her jacket that Jim couldn't quite read. The crowd parted, sensing something bigger unfolding. Kayla faltered, her bravado cracking. "Just a customer causing trouble," she said, but her voice wavered. The woman's gaze locked on Jim, taking in his weathered face, the groceries, the card on the counter. "Doesn't look like trouble to me," she said, her tone icy. "Looks like a veteran being disrespected." The word veteran hung in the air, and the crowd's murmurs shifted, some faces softening, others freezing in shame. Jim's throat tightened, a flicker of hope sparking in his chest. But Brad wasn't done. "Ma'am, this is a store matter," he said, stepping forward, his smile back but strained. "We're handling it." The woman raised an eyebrow, unamused. "Handling it? By humiliating a man who served?" She turned to Jim, her voice softening. "Sir, what's your name?" Jim hesitated, then said, "James Whitaker, ma'am. Marine Corps, 66 to 70. Her eyes flickered with recognition, but she didn't elaborate, instead turning back to Brad. "Run his card, now." The tension skyrocketed. Kayla's face flushed, Brad's jaw twitched, and the guard paused, unsure. The crowd was riveted, phones still recording, their whispers a low hum. Jim's hands rested on the counter, his dog tags cool against his chest, and for the first time that day, he felt seen. But the fight wasn't over. Brad's eyes darted to the guard, and Kayla's fingers hovered over the register, her defiance simmering. Outside, the wail of sirens grew louder, and the parking lot filled with flashing lights, hinting at something bigger barreling toward them. We're on the edge of the climax now. What happens next will flip everything upside down. You can't miss how this unfolds. Stay tuned for the moment Jim's fight changes everything. The grocery store was a pressure cooker, the air crackling with anticipation. Jim Whitaker stood at the register, his trembling hands steadying against the counter, his dog tags a quiet weight under his flannel. The cashier, Kayla, hovered over the register, her defiance wilting under the piercing gaze of the woman in the blazer, whose badge now glinted under the fluorescent lights, revealing her name, Senator Elaine Harper. The manager, Brad, stood rigid, his fake smile crumbling as the security guard hesitated, walkie-talkie crackling. Outside, red and blue lights flashed through the windows, sirens fading into an eerie hum. The crowd, phones still raised, buzzed with whispers, their earlier impatience replaced by a mix of awe and shame. Senator Harper's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Run! His card!" Each word was deliberate, her eyes locked on Brad, who swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. Kayla's fingers twitched, but she didn't move, her bravado reduced to a sullen glare. Jim's heart pounded, not from fear but from a surge of something he hadn't felt in years. Validation. The toddler from earlier, still clutching her mother's hand, pointed at Jim and whispered, "He's a hero, Mommy." The mother shushed her, but the words landed like a lifeline, anchoring Jim against the storm of humiliation. Brad, desperate to regain control, stepped forward, his voice oily. "Senator, with all due respect, this is a private business matter. The card's expired, and—" Harper raised a hand, silencing him mid-sentence. "Expired?" she said, her tone laced with incredulity. She turned to Jim, her expression softening. "Mr. Whitaker, may I see it?" Jim nodded, sliding the worn card across the counter, its edges frayed like the memories it carried. Harper examined it, her fingers tracing the faded Marine Corps emblem, then glanced at the register screen where the expired message glowed falsely. "This card is valid," she said, her voice rising, addressing not just Brad but the entire store. "I know because I fought for the funding to keep these discounts active. You're not just disrespecting a veteran, you're spitting on every soldier who served." The crowd gasped, phones capturing every word. A man in a flannel shirt lowered his head, shame creeping into his face. The woman with the diaper cart wiped her eyes, murmuring, "That's awful." Jim's throat tightened, memories flooding back. Ellen's letters, the weight of his rifle, the faces of friends lost. He'd never asked for pity, only respect, and now, in this unlikely moment, it was unfolding. Kayla, cornered, snapped, "I didn't know, okay? It's just a job." Her voice cracked, revealing a flicker of fear beneath her arrogance. Harper's eyes narrowed. "Ignorance isn't an excuse," she said, then turned to Brad. "You let this happen. Why?" Brad stammered. I was just following protocol." Harper's laugh was sharp, humorless. "Protocol? Humiliating a Marine is your protocol?" She gestured to the crowd. "Anyone else here think this is okay?" Silence fell, heavy and damning. A single cough echoed, then a voice from the back shouted, "No way! He deserves better!" The crowd stirred, murmurs of agreement rippling through, a tide turning. Jim's hands rested on the counter, his dog tags cool against his chest, a symbol of battles past. He thought of Ellen, her photo tucked in his wallet, her smile urging him to stand tall. "I just wanted my groceries," he said, his voice quiet but carrying, "and a little respect." The words landed like a thunderclap, and the crowd's murmurs grew louder, a chorus of support. A young man in a hoodie stepped forward, placing his own groceries on the counter. "Run his card or I'm walking out," he said, glaring at Brad. Others nodded, baskets clinking as they moved closer, forming a human wall behind Jim. Brad's face paled, sweat beading on his forehead. He glanced at the security guard, who shrugged, clearly unwilling to escalate. Outside, the flashing lights intensified and the glass doors slid open, revealing 2 local news vans pulling into the lot, cameras already rolling. Harper noticed, her lips twitching into a faint smile. "Looks like the world's watching now," she said, then stepped behind the register, nudging Kayla aside. "I'll do it myself." The crowd erupted in cheers, phones flashing as Harper scanned Jim's card with a satisfying beep. The screen lit up. "Veteran discount applied." Kayla stumbled back, her face flushed, while Brad muttered something about corporate and slunk toward the office. Harper handed Jim his receipt, her hand lingering on his. "Thank you for your service, Mr. Whitaker," she said, her voice warm but fierce. "This won't happen again." She turned to the crowd, raising her voice. "This man fought for us. It's time we fight for him." The store exploded in applause, the toddler clapping wildly, her mother tearing up. A woman in a red coat shouted, "Semper Fi!" and Jim's eyes stung, a Marine's pride swelling in his chest. As Jim gathered his groceries, Harper pulled out her phone, dialing quickly. "Get me the store's regional manager," she said, her tone promising consequences. The crowd parted for Jim, hands reaching out to pat his shoulder, voices offering apologies and thanks. Outside, reporters swarmed, their microphones ready. But Jim paused at the door, his trembling hands steadying as he touched his dog tags. He thought of Ellen, of his fallen brothers, and whispered, "This one's for you." The senator's voice carried behind him, addressing the cameras now. Her words a vow, "No veteran will be disrespected on my watch." Jim stepped into the sunlight, the weight of the day lifting, his dignity restored, not just by Harper but by the crowd, the toddler, the town that finally saw him. The fight wasn't over, but for now he'd won.